The base always smelled faintly of gun oil and red desert dust, a mixture that clung to the inside of her nostrils no matter how many times she showered. Sergeant Amelia Grant was used to it by now, just as she was used to the dismissive nods she got from some of the infantrymen when they saw her walk by in her regulation fatigues. To most of them, she was just the army clerk, a quiet figure behind a counter stacked with requisition forms, serial numbers, and racks of M4 carbines that she meticulously checked in and out day after day. They didn't see the early mornings she spent memorizing the maintenance logs, the hours she devoted to learning every detail about every weapon in their arsenal, or the time she spent at night on the range, pushing herself beyond the standard qualification drills. To them, she was just the one who handed out their gear, signed off on their ammo allotments, and reminded them to clean their rifles before bringing them back. That was fine with her. In fact, she liked it that way. The less attention she drew, the easier it was to train in peace, to sharpen skills nobody thought she had a right to possess. Her father used to tell her, "Let them underestimate you, Emma. It's your best weapon." She'd learned early that being overlooked could be a shield, and she wore that invisibility like armor. The outpost was a small one, carved out of a plateau overlooking miles of barren desert. The horizon shimmered during the day, heat waves bending the light into strange mirages, and at night, the sky turned into a cold, endless ocean of stars. Amelia had been stationed there for 8 months, long enough to know the routines by heart, the times the patrols left and came back, the shift changes in the watchtowers, the patterns of the occasional drone that buzzed overhead. The army was her kingdom, a steel-walled room where everything was labeled, organized, and spotless, every weapon checked and rechecked for readiness. She was good at her job, and she liked the sense of control it gave her. But lately, something had been gnawing at her. She wanted to be more than the one who handed out rifles to the ones who fought. She wanted to prove, to herself more than anyone else, that she wasn't just a clerk. And she was ready for that chance, even if she didn't know it yet. That chance came one quiet afternoon when the desert heat was suffocating, and the base was so still it felt like time had stopped. She was cleaning a Barrett M82A1, one of the few long-range sniper rifles they kept in stock, carefully polishing the scope lenses with a soft cloth. The Barrett was a beast of a rifle, heavy and loud, but Amelia loved it. She'd spent countless nights dry firing with it, memorizing its weight, its recoil, the way the trigger broke so cleanly. As she worked, she overheard a conversation between 2 soldiers leaning against the wall outside. They spoke in hushed tones, but in the silence of the afternoon, their voices carried. "You hear about the sniper again?" one of them murmured. "Yeah, they say he hit Staff Sergeant Torres from over 3 clicks away. Took his head clean off." Amelia froze, her hands stilling over the rifle. The sniper. She'd heard rumors for weeks, whispers about an enemy marksman out there in the wasteland, someone so good it felt like he could see through walls. At first, she thought it was just campfire gossip meant to spook the rookies, but the casualty reports had been stacking up. Convoy ambushes where soldiers never saw the shot coming, patrol leaders taken down with precision so exact it was surgical. Whoever this sniper was, he was no myth. That evening, Amelia stayed late in the army, running her fingers over the cold metal of the Barrett, thinking about the man out there who could kill at distances most snipers only dreamed of hitting. 3,800 meters, that was the number whispered like a curse among the men. She couldn't stop picturing it, a single bullet slicing through the air across nearly 4 kilometers, guided by steady hands and a predator's patience. It fascinated her, terrified her, and ignited something deep in her gut. She'd been practicing for months, teaching herself ballistic calculations, wind reading, and range estimation in secret. She devoured every sniper manual she could get her hands on, studied bullet drop charts until they burned into her memory. And now, for the first time, she wondered if she'd get the chance to use all of it. 2 days later, that chance arrived in the form of chaos. The base alarm wailed, a shrill, piercing sound that yanked her from her cot in the small barracks room she shared with 2 other female soldiers. She grabbed her boots and rifle, heart pounding, as she ran toward the sound of shouting voices and hurried footsteps. Outside, the air was thick with dust kicked up by hums scrambling into position, and the smell of burning rubber stung her nose. "Sniper!" someone yelled from the watchtower. "We're taking fire from the ridge." The ridge they meant was nearly 3 miles out, a jagged outcrop of rock that loomed over the desert like a crouching predator. Amelia ducked into the army to grab her helmet and vest, her hands moving automatically as muscle memory took over. The men rushed past her, grabbing rifles and ammo, their faces pale and tight with fear. A medic sprinted by carrying a blooded corporal, his leg shredded by a round that had come out of nowhere. She felt a cold calm settle over her as she watched the chaos. The sniper was real. He was out there. And he was killing them one by one. She didn't remember making the decision to grab the Barrett, but when she stepped back out into the sun, the massive rifle was slung over her shoulder, and a heavy ammo bag was at her hip. The others were too busy scrambling for cover to notice her heading toward the observation post that overlooked the desert. She climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time, the Barrett awkward in her arms, and when she reached the top, she dropped to her belly behind the sandbags. The lookout soldier, a young private with terror in his wide eyes, blinked at her. What are you? Move, she said, her voice steady in a way that surprised her. He didn't argue. She crawled forward, setting the Barrett up on its bipod, and pressed her cheek against the stock. Through the scope, the desert exploded into detail, every shimmer of heat, every ripple of wind over the sand. She adjusted the magnification and scanned the ridge. Somewhere out there, a man was watching them. Somewhere out there, he was waiting for his next shot. Her pulse slowed as she breathed deep, letting her training take over. She'd practiced this 1,000 times in secret, imagined this exact moment over and over. But this was real, and the stakes were life or death. She spotted a glint of light near a cluster of rocks, so faint she almost thought it was her imagination. She held her breath and adjusted the scope. There, a flash of movement, a hint of a barrel sticking out from behind a boulder. Her heart thudded once, hard. That was him. He was nearly 4 kilometers away, just as the rumor said, and he was already lining up another shot. She calculated quickly, her mind running through ballistic equations like a computer. The wind was gusting left to right, maybe 10 miles per hour. The humidity was low. At this range, the bullet drop would be over 400 inches. She dialed the scope, set her holdover, and exhaled slowly. Come on, she whispered under her breath, steadying her aim. She had one chance to prove she wasn't just an army clerk. One chance to show that all those nights of practice weren't wasted. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and for a moment, the whole world went silent except for the sound of her breathing. The rifle's recoil slammed into her shoulder, but Amelia barely felt it as she kept her eye pressed to the scope, tracking the bullet's flight in her mind. At nearly 4 kilometers, there was no way to see the round travel, but she knew its path intimately, had memorized the seconds it would take before impact, and the way the wind would push it slightly off course. For a breathless moment, there was nothing, then a puff of dust erupted near the sniper's position, too far to the left. She clicked her tongue softly and adjusted her aim, already chambering another round. The enemy sniper hadn't fired back yet, which meant he hadn't seen her or hadn't believed she could pose a threat at this range. That was his mistake. She adjusted for the wind again, letting her instincts guide her more than the math this time, and settled her breathing. Her finger curled around the trigger with practiced precision, and she squeezed. The second shot rang out, echoing across the plateau like a thunderclap. This time she didn't blink. She held her gaze through the scope, her pulse steady, and saw it, a sudden, sharp movement as the enemy sniper's body jerked back from behind the boulder, his rifle clattering to the rocks. A dark mist bloomed in the shimmering heat, and she knew without doubt she'd hit him. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the wind whipping over the outpost walls. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She simply lowered her rifle slightly and scanned the ridge for any signs of movement. There was none. She'd done it. The phantom that had haunted every patrol, every convoy, every soldier's nightmare was gone, and she was the one who had ended him. She slid back from the sandbags and glanced at the private who was still crouched nearby, his mouth slightly open in shock. He stared at her like she'd just performed a miracle, and maybe she had. She didn't say a word, just gave him a curt nod and started dismantling the Barrett with calm precision. Her hands didn't shake, not even a little. She moved like she was back in the army, cleaning and cataloging weapons, just another day at work. The private scrambled to his feet and shouted down to the men below that the sniper was down, that he'd seen it himself, and the base erupted with relieved shouts and cheers. But Amelia didn't bask in their praise. She carefully packed up the rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and climbed down from the observation post. The moment her boots hit the dirt, she was surrounded by soldiers, their faces a mix of awe and gratitude. Someone clapped her on the back, another whistled low under his breath, but all she did was walk past them, her expression unreadable. She wasn't used to attention, and she didn't want it now. Her place was behind the counter, in the quiet, with the smell of gun oil and the hum of fluorescent lights. But as she stepped back into the army, she knew nothing would be the same again. That night, the base was alive with whispers. They called her a hero, though most of them didn't even know her name. She overheard them in the mess hall, voices low but reverent, talking about the army girl who'd taken out the ghost sniper. She sat alone at a corner table, eating her food slowly, ignoring the glances sent her way. She wasn't looking for glory, she'd done what had to be done. Still, a part of her couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction, not because she'd finally proven herself to them, but because she'd proven herself to herself. All those nights of study, all those hours on the range when no one was watching, all the time she'd been told she was just a clerk and nothing more, they'd all led to this moment. She'd looked death in the eye and won. When she finished her meal, she returned to the army and sat alone in the dim light, meticulously cleaning the barrett again, every motion methodical, almost meditative. The rifle had done its job, and so had she. She didn't need anyone's approval to know that. The following morning, she was summoned to the command tent. Captain Morales, a stern man with deep lines etched into his sunburned face, studied her from behind his desk as she stood at attention. "Sergeant Grant," he said slowly, "do you know what you did yesterday?" She met his gaze evenly. "I neutralized a threat, sir." His lips twitched in something close to a smile. "Neutralized a threat," he repeated. "You took out the sniper that's been terrorizing us for months. You did what no one else could." He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "You realize this changes things, right?" She didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. He sighed and shook his head, almost amused. "You're wasted in the army, Grant. We're going to fix that." And just like that, her life shifted. She walked out of the tent not just a clerk anymore, but a soldier whose skill had earned her a place at the table. The whispers followed her wherever she went, but she tuned them out. The only thing that mattered was that she was finally being seen for who she truly was. In the days that followed, she was sent on missions, not as a support staffer, but as a sniper. Her transition was seamless. She'd been preparing for this role for years, even if no one else had noticed. She joined Overwatch teams, climbed into high perches with her Barrett, and watched the desert through her scope with a predator's patience. Each mission felt like confirmation that she was exactly where she belonged. Her kills were clean, precise, and necessary, but each one weighed on her in quiet moments. She didn't celebrate them, didn't talk about them, but the respect she earned from her peers was undeniable. The same soldiers who had once overlooked her now sought her out for advice, asked for her guidance, and followed her lead in the field. The nickname Army Girl faded, replaced by something simpler and true, Sniper. But even as she settled into her new role, she couldn't shake the image of that day, the wind over the ridge, the glint of sunlight on the enemy's scope, the stillness of the desert before she pulled the trigger. She thought about the man she'd killed, wondered who he was, what had led him to become the ghost sniper. She knew better than to dwell on it, but the questions lingered all the same. War turned people into predators, into ghosts. She was no different, and that truth haunted her more than she liked to admit. Still, every time she picked up the Barrett and felt its familiar weight in her hands, she knew she'd made the right choice. She was a sniper now, and there was no going back. The missions kept coming, and with each one Amelia felt herself change in subtle ways she couldn't fully articulate. She was still the same woman who once spent her nights behind a counter cataloging rifles, but there was something colder in her now, something sharper, like a blade honed by constant use. Her world had narrowed to calculations and patience, to finding vantage points where she could see without being seen, to reading the wind and the light like they were languages only she understood. She became a ghost hunter, stalking those who thought they were invisible, and though she never sought recognition, she couldn't deny the quiet thrill of hearing her name spoken with respect instead of dismissal. The unit moved differently around her now. They didn't just see a clerk anymore, they saw someone who could tip the balance of a battle with a single squeeze of a trigger. She tried to stay grounded, to remind herself that skill didn't make her invincible, but there was a confidence in her now, born from proving herself when it mattered most. At night, when the base was silent and the stars stretched endlessly above, she would lie awake and replay every shot she'd taken, every life she'd ended, and wonder if she was losing something of herself with each mission. She knew she had to keep that doubt in check, because hesitation could get her killed, but the weight of her actions was becoming a constant companion, one she carried as carefully as her rifle. Her reputation spread beyond her unit faster than she expected. One morning, she was called into a briefing tent where several unfamiliar officers waited, their expressions serious. She stood at attention as they discussed an enemy commander rumored to be operating in the area, a man responsible for orchestrating countless ambushes and attacks. Intelligence placed him in a fortified compound on the edge of a canyon, heavily guarded and well supplied. Taking him out could cripple enemy operations in the region, but conventional assaults would come at too high a cost. They needed a sniper, someone who could end the threat with a single shot from a distance that would render his guards useless. Amelia listened in silence, her heartbeat steady even as the plan unfolded. She knew they were talking about her before they even said her name. When the captain finally looked at her and asked if she was up for the task, she didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." That night, as she cleaned the Barrett for the 100th time, she thought about what lay ahead. This wasn't just another mission. This was a test, a chance to prove that her first kill at 3,800 meters wasn't a fluke, that she truly belonged in this world of calculated death. She felt no fear, only a quiet resolve that hummed through her veins like electricity. The team set out before dawn, moving silently through the desert, their vehicles crawling across the sand like shadows. Amelia sat in the back of a Humvee, the Barrett resting across her lap, her eyes scanning the horizon. The others barely spoke, their silence an acknowledgement of the stakes. The canyon came into view just as the first light touched the sky, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The enemy compound was barely visible in the distance, its outlines blending into the rocky terrain, but Amelia's eyes locked on it immediately, her sniper's instinct kicking in. They parked the vehicles several kilometers away and proceeded on foot, moving with deliberate care to avoid detection. She led the way up a narrow ridge, every step calculated to keep noise to a minimum. When they finally reached the vantage point, she dropped to her belly and crawled forward, her body moving like a predator stalking prey. The wind was calm, the air crisp, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She set up the Barrett, extending its bipod and locking the scope into place. Through the glass, the compound came alive with detail. Guards paced along the perimeter, their rifles slung lazily, unaware of the danger lurking beyond their sight. Amelia scanned the area methodically, searching for the commander. She spotted him within minutes, standing near a cluster of vehicles, his posture authoritative, his gestures sharp as he barked orders. Her breath slowed as she watched him, calculating distance, wind speed, and bullet drop with practiced precision. At this range, the shot would be difficult, but not impossible. She adjusted her scope, her fingers moving with mechanical confidence, and set her sights on his chest. The men around her whispered quietly, relaying information over their radios, but their voices faded into the background. In this moment, there was only her, the rifle, and the target. She steadied her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow, her body sinking into a state of perfect stillness. Time seemed to stretch as she took up the slack in the trigger, her mind clear and focused. When she fired, the sound was muffled by a suppressor, but the recoil still jolted her shoulder. She tracked the bullet's flight in her mind, a silent prayer on her lips, and then she saw it, a clean impact, the commander collapsing in a heap as chaos erupted in the compound. Guards scrambled, shouting in confusion, but none of them knew where the shot had come from. Amelia was already chambering another round, scanning for secondary targets. She fired again, dropping a guard who'd spotted their ridge, then another who was scrambling for cover. The team moved quickly, their mission complete, retreating with the same quiet precision they'd arrived with. Amelia was the last to leave, her rifle still trained on the compound, her heart steady. The commander was dead. Another ghost had been put to rest. When they returned to base, the atmosphere was different. The tension that had hung over the outpost for weeks seemed to lift, replaced by an unspoken respect that followed her everywhere she went. She didn't crave it, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of earning it. The men who once overlooked her now saluted her with genuine admiration, and even the officers regarded her with a kind of wary respect reserved for those who'd proven themselves under fire. That night, alone in the army, she cleaned her rifle in silence, the rhythmic motion calming her racing thoughts. She thought of the man she'd killed, of the ripple effect his death would cause, and she felt the weight of her actions settle on her chest. But she also felt something else, a sense of belonging, of purpose. She wasn't just a clerk anymore. She was a sniper, and she had become exactly what she was meant to be. The missions grew more dangerous as Amelia's reputation spread, and it wasn't long before her name began circulating among enemy ranks like a whispered curse. She became a ghost to them, a shadow that struck from impossible distances and vanished before they could retaliate. Some claimed she wasn't real, that the Americans were using drones or experimental tech to explain the precision of her kills. Others swore she was a demon, a woman with cold eyes and a rifle that could see through souls. Amelia ignored the rumors, but deep down she knew the power they carried. Fear could be as effective as a bullet. Still, fear was a double-edged sword, and it didn't take long for the enemy to respond. Patrols became more dangerous, ambushes more frequent, and whispers began spreading through her own ranks that a counter-sniper had been dispatched to hunt her. It didn't rattle her at first. She'd faced danger before, and she trusted her skills. But the thought of another sniper, someone out there studying her the way she studied her targets, planted a seed of tension she couldn't shake. Every time she took up a position, She scanned the horizon longer, slower, searching for any sign of glass glinting in the sun, any unnatural movement in the rocks. The hunter had become the hunted, and the game was about to escalate. Weeks passed, and the tension became a constant hum in the background of her life. Even when she wasn't on mission, she felt eyes on her, phantom sights trained on her back. Her fellow soldiers noticed the change in her demeanor. She spoke less, smiled even less, and spent more time alone at the range or in the army, perfecting her craft. She studied enemy sniper tactics, memorizing patterns, learning how they thought, how they hunted. She knew that if someone truly was coming for her, they'd be patient, meticulous, and relentless, qualities she understood intimately because they were the same ones that defined her. And then, one sweltering afternoon, her fears materialized. The team was out on a reconnaissance mission, moving cautiously through a dry riverbed, when a single, distant shot cracked the silence. The round struck inches from her point man's helmet, embedding itself in the dirt with terrifying precision. The team dove for cover, scattering behind rocks and fallen logs, but Amelia knew immediately this wasn't random gunfire. That shot had been a message. Someone out there knew exactly where they were, and that someone was very, very good. The team hunkered down, radios crackling as they called for backup and tried to pinpoint the sniper's location. Amelia stayed perfectly still, her back pressed against a sun-baked boulder, her rifle cradled in her arms. Her mind raced through possibilities, calculating angles, ranges, and cover. She closed her eyes briefly, listening, feeling for the subtle cues that might give away the shooter's position. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made every heartbeat sound like thunder in her ears. Then she caught it, a faint glimmer of light far up the slope to their west, just for an instant before it disappeared. It was all she needed. She crawled slowly to the edge of her cover, keeping her profile low, and set up her Barrett with deliberate precision. Her heart pounded, but her breathing stayed calm as she scanned the slope through her scope. The enemy sniper was well camouflaged, blending into the rocks almost perfectly, but Amelia's trained eyes picked out the subtle shape of a rifle barrel. They were over 2 kilometers away, but she knew this opponent was every bit as skilled as she was, maybe more. This wasn't going to be easy. She adjusted her scope carefully, her mind running ballistic calculations automatically. The sun was high, casting harsh shadows, and the wind was steady but unpredictable near the ridge. She waited, patient as stone, watching for the sniper to make their next move. Minutes crawled by, the tension mounting with every second. Then she saw it, the smallest shift of a shoulder, the barely perceptible movement of a scope adjusting. She fired instantly, the shot cracking through the stillness like a whip. Dust kicked up inches from the sniper's position, and she knew she'd missed by a hair. She rolled quickly to the side, anticipating the return shot, and a split second later a round smacked into the boulder where her head had been. The sniper was fast, terrifyingly fast, and their precision was chilling. Amelia moved again, crawling to a different angle, her mind cold and focused. This was no ordinary duel, this was a battle between predators, and only one of them would walk away. The next 30 minutes felt like an eternity. She fired again, forcing the enemy to reposition, and he returned the favor, pinning her down with well-placed shots that chipped away at her cover. The rest of her team stayed low, unable to assist without drawing fire. Amelia knew this was her fight alone, and strangely, she welcomed it. This was what she'd been training for, what all those nights of solitary practice had prepared her for. She became a machine, her breathing measured, her movements deliberate, her thoughts reduced to angles, distances, and probabilities. She waited for him to make a mistake, and eventually, he did. A gust of wind shifted suddenly, carrying a glint of light from his scope just long enough for her to lock onto his exact position. She exhaled slowly, adjusted her aim a fraction, and squeezed the trigger. This time, the shot was perfect. Through her scope, she saw the enemy sniper jerk violently, his rifle tumbling from his hands as he slumped forward. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the ringing in her ears. She stayed still, watching the body for any sign of movement, but there was none. Slowly, she allowed herself to relax, though her muscles ached from tension. Her team emerged cautiously from their cover, their faces a mix of relief and awe. "He's down," one of them whispered, but Amelia didn't reply. She remained on her stomach for another full minute, scanning the ridge, making sure there were no surprises. Only when she was certain did she rise, her movements deliberate, and sling the Barrett over her shoulder. The men gave her wide berths as they regrouped, their respect palpable. They all knew what had just happened. They'd witnessed a duel between masters, and Amelia had come out alive. When they returned to base, word spread quickly. The sniper who had been sent to hunt her, the one who had nearly killed her point man, was dead. Amelia's legend grew, but with it came a deeper weight on her conscience. That man hadn't been a nameless ghost, he'd been someone like her, a skilled marksman who dedicated his life to his craft. She didn't regret the kill, it was him or her, and she chose to live, but she couldn't help but feel the gravity of it pressing down on her. That night, she sat alone on a hill overlooking the base, the barrett resting beside her, and stared out at the endless desert. She thought about the path that had led her here, from a quiet clerk behind a counter to a name whispered with both fear and reverence. She wondered how much of herself she'd lost along the way, how much more she would lose before the war was over. But when she closed her eyes, she saw her comrades alive and safe because of her, and she knew she'd make the same choices again. She had become a guardian, a hunter, and though the burden was heavy, it was hers to bear. The days after the sniper duel felt strangely quiet, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The patrols went out cautiously, the usual tension still there, but a subtle shift had occurred. The soldiers trusted Amelia now, not just as a comrade but as a shield, a watchful eye that could see threats long before they became danger. They walked taller knowing she was out there, somewhere above them, scanning the horizon through her scope. Amelia noticed the change, the way men who once dismissed her now treated her with quiet respect, but she didn't dwell on it. Respect wasn't what drove her, survival was, and she knew that every day out here was a gamble. For a while, there were no new snipers sent against her, no ambushes that felt orchestrated with precision. She suspected they were regrouping, studying her, waiting for the right moment to strike again. That thought haunted her as she lay awake at night in her small barracks room, listening to the hum of the base generator and the distant howl of wind over the dunes. She'd grown used to being hunted, to the adrenaline that came with every mission, and the sudden lull felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. It wasn't long before that storm arrived. Intelligence intercepted chatter suggesting a high-value target was moving through the region, a convoy carrying an enemy officer whose death would destabilize their operations even further. Amelia was called in for the briefing, and when the captain laid out the plan, she felt a familiar tingle of anticipation in her gut. The convoy would pass through a narrow valley, one of the few routes connecting their strongholds. It was heavily guarded, with armored vehicles and drone surveillance, but it was also predictable. Amelia's job was simple: eliminate the officer from extreme range before the convoy reached its destination. It was the kind of mission she excelled at, and she accepted it without hesitation. But something in the captain's expression as he spoke made her uneasy. He didn't just see her as a soldier anymore, he saw her as a weapon, and weapons were used until they broke. The team moved out at dusk, the sky painted in fiery streaks of red and orange as the sun sank behind the mountains. Amelia rode in silence, her barrett disassembled and packed neatly in its case beside her. She went over the plan in her head, visualizing every step, every possible complication. The valley would be crawling with enemy eyes, and one mistake could expose their position. She reminded herself that she'd faced worse, that she'd survived sniper duels and ambushes, but deep down she knew this mission would test her in ways she hadn't been tested before. They arrived at their position just after midnight, climbing the rocky slopes in complete darkness. Amelia led the way, her senses heightened, every crunch of gravel beneath her boots sounding deafening in the silence. When they reached the overlook, she immediately went to work setting up her rifle, assembling it piece by piece with careful precision. The wind was low, the air cool and still. She scanned the valley below through her scope, committing every shadow, every turn of the road, to memory. Hours passed in silence as they waited, the darkness thick and suffocating. Amelia lay prone, her rifle trained on the valley, her mind focused but calm. Patience was a sniper's greatest weapon, and she had mastered it. Finally, just as the horizon began to pale with the first light of dawn, movement appeared in the distance. The convoy. Through her scope, she saw the lead vehicles, dust clouds trailing behind them like banners. She adjusted her magnification, counting vehicles, noting their formation. The target would likely be in the third or fourth vehicle, an armored SUV surrounded by guards. Her heart rate slowed as she tracked them, her breathing even. She adjusted for distance, wind, and elevation, her hands steady as she dialed the scope. The convoy moved closer, the sun creeping higher, bathing the valley in golden light. She spotted him, her target, seated in the back of the SUV, his window down slightly, his face visible just enough for a shot. She took in a slow breath, lined up her crosshairs, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean, precise, a single thunderclap that shattered the stillness. Through her scope, she saw the man's head snap back, the SUV veering as the driver panicked. Chaos erupted in the valley as guards scrambled, their weapons scanning for a threat they couldn't see. Amelia was already chambering another round, scanning for any sign of retaliation. Then she saw it, a flash of movement on the opposite ridge. Her instincts screamed at her, and she rolled to the side just as a round slammed into the rock where she'd been lying. Another sniper. She cursed under her breath, crawling to a new position while her spotter relayed coordinates. This wasn't a coincidence. They'd expected her. She realized, with a cold jolt of clarity, that this mission hadn't just been about eliminating the officer, it had been bait, a trap designed to draw her out. The enemy sniper was good, firing in quick, precise bursts that forced her to stay low. Each shot chipped away at her cover, showering her with fragments of stone. Amelia's mind worked furiously, calculating angles and distances even as her heart pounded in her chest. She moved with practiced efficiency, crawling to a better vantage point, her body low and silent. She caught a glimpse of him through her scope, a figure in desert camo, perfectly concealed among the rocks. He fired again, and she barely dodged in time, feeling the wind of the bullet as it passed close enough to make her ears ring. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. Panic was death. She had to stay calm, had to become invisible. She slowed her breathing, steadied her hands, and focused on the shot. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours as the duel continued, each sniper trying to outwit the other. Her spotter fed her range data, whispering updates, but Amelia barely heard him. She was in her own world, a tunnel vision where nothing existed but her and the target. She watched for the slightest mistake, the tiniest movement that would give him away. And then she saw it, a flash of light on his scope, a fraction of a second where the sun betrayed him. She didn't hesitate. Her finger tightened, and the Barrett roared. Through the scope, she saw him crumple, his body folding in on itself before he disappeared behind the rocks. She kept her sights trained on the spot, waiting, but there was no return fire. She'd won again. But as she lay there, heart still pounding, she couldn't shake the thought that this wouldn't be the last time someone came for her. She'd become a legend, and legends always drew challenges. They withdrew quickly, their mission complete, and Amelia felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders as they trekked back through the barren hills. She'd survived another hunt, claimed another ghost, but each victory felt heavier than the last. That night, back at base, she sat alone with the Barrett, her fingers tracing the familiar scratches in its metal. It had become more than a tool, it was an extension of her, a piece of herself forged in fire and fear. She cleaned it meticulously, her thoughts drifting to the man she'd killed, and the man before him, and all the others whose names she'd never know. She wondered if somewhere out there, another sniper was already training, already plotting to take her down. The thought didn't scare her. If anything, it sharpened her resolve. She'd face them all, one by one, as long as she had breath in her lungs and a steady hand on the trigger. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of missions, briefings, and the constant hum of danger that never truly left. Amelia had become a ghost, a figure whispered about among her comrades, a sniper who seemed untouchable. Soldiers she barely knew nodded with respect when she passed, and even officers who once dismissed her now consulted her like a trusted advisor. Yet the weight of her reputation felt like a chain around her neck. She couldn't walk across the base without feeling eyes on her, couldn't eat in the mess hall without hearing hushed voices speaking her name. Some saw her as a hero, others as a weapon, but Amelia felt neither. She was just a soldier doing her job, a job that left invisible scars she couldn't show anyone. Each night, she sat alone in her small room, cleaning her rifle with mechanical precision, because the familiar ritual kept her mind from unraveling. The Barrett had become more than a tool, it was her anchor, the one constant in a world of chaos. But even that couldn't keep the nightmares away. She dreamed of deserts and shadows, of crosshairs locking on faces she didn't recognize, of pulling the trigger and waking to the echo of gunfire in her ears. Sleep was no refuge, it was another battlefield. When orders came for a new deployment deeper into enemy territory, she didn't hesitate. Rest wasn't something she expected anymore, and missions gave her purpose. This one was different from the usual Overwatch assignments. Intelligence suggested that enemy forces were reorganizing under a new commander, one who was rumored to be a sniper himself. Reports described him as methodical, ruthless, and calculating. He had been responsible for several ambushes that left Allied patrols decimated. Now, the mission was clear. Amelia was to locate him and eliminate him before he could strike again. She felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as she studied his profile during the briefing, his stern features captured in grainy photos. This wouldn't be like the others. This wasn't just another faceless target. This was someone who understood her world, someone who could anticipate her every move. The idea didn't scare her, it sharpened her focus. For the first time, she was hunting someone who could hunt her back on equal footing. The team inserted under the cover of night, moving like shadows through jagged mountain terrain. The air was colder here, the wind sharper, carrying with it the scent of dust and gun oil. Amelia felt at home in the darkness, her senses alive, every sound amplified in the stillness. They set up camp on a ridge overlooking a valley where their target was expected to appear. Days of waiting followed, long hours spent prone in the dirt, motionless except for the slow adjustments of her scope. She barely spoke, her communication with her spotter reduced to soft whispers and hand signals. The landscape itself felt hostile, the jagged cliffs like teeth, the valleys like traps waiting to snap shut. It reminded her of her own mind, quiet, dangerous, unpredictable. She studied every rock and shadow until she could close her eyes and picture the terrain perfectly. Snipers survived by becoming part of their surroundings, and she melted into the earth, patient as stone. The enemy commander proved as elusive as his reputation suggested. Convoys came and went, patrols scouted the area, but there was no sign of him. The waiting stretched on, a test of endurance, but Amelia was built for this. She slowed her breathing, forced her mind to stay sharp, and ignored the ache in her muscles. On the third day, movement caught her attention. Through her scope, she saw a figure emerge from a cluster of vehicles, moving with the confidence of someone who owned the ground he walked on. Even at this distance, she recognized him from the photos, the new commander. He carried himself like a man who knew he was protected, his every step guarded by soldiers scanning the hills. Amelia felt her pulse quicken as she tracked him, adjusting for distance, wind, and angle. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, but she didn't fire. Not yet. She watched as he surveyed the valley, his eyes sweeping the ridges, and for a moment, she had the unsettling feeling that he was looking directly at her. She froze, her breath caught in her chest, her instincts screaming. This man wasn't just a target. He was a hunter too. The tension stretched like a wire between them, even though he couldn't see her. Amelia steadied herself, exhaling slowly, waiting for the perfect shot. The commander turned his head, gesturing to a guard, and she saw her opening. She squeezed the trigger, the Barrett's recoil slamming into her shoulder, and the man's head snapped back as he crumpled to the ground. Chaos erupted below as guards scrambled, weapons raised, shouting orders into radios. But even as she chambered another round, she felt it, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the instinct that had saved her life before. She rolled instinctively, a split second before a bullet shattered the rock where her head had been. Another sniper. The commander hadn't come alone. This had been a trap. Her heart pounded as she scrambled for cover, her spotter calling out coordinates. The enemy sniper was skilled, firing in quick, precise bursts that pinned them down. Amelia crawled low, her body pressed to the ground, moving in a slow arc to flank him. Every instinct screamed that this opponent was different, faster, sharper. She spotted him briefly through her scope, a silhouette nestled perfectly in the rocks, his barrel steady. He fired again, and she felt the bullet tear through the air so close that she tasted the grit it kicked up. She forced herself to slow down, to breathe. Panic would get her killed. She closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing his position, then opened them and slid into place, her rifle steady. Through her scope, she saw him shift slightly, scanning for her. It was all she needed. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and watched as the round struck home. The sniper fell, his rifle clattering against the rocks. The silence that followed was deafening. Her spotter confirmed the kill, but Amelia didn't celebrate. She stayed motionless for another minute, scanning for movement, until she was certain the threat was gone. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Her body trembled with adrenaline, but her mind was clear. Another hunter was gone, another ghost added to the weight she carried. As they withdrew under the cover of darkness, Amelia felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. She had survived again, but each victory seemed to cost her more than the last. Back at base, she sat alone cleaning her rifle, her hands moving automatically, her thoughts distant. The faces of the men she'd killed haunted her, not because she regretted it, but because she understood them. They were like her, trained, disciplined, deadly. Each sniper duel was like staring into a mirror, and every time she pulled the trigger, she felt a piece of herself slip away. Yet she knew she wouldn't stop. She couldn't. This was who she had become, a shadow in the desert, a whisper of death carried on the wind. The next morning brought no celebration, no ceremony, only another briefing and another mission sheet slipped under her door. Amelia didn't bother to protest. She'd long accepted that her value to command was measured in confirmed kills, not in rest days or recognition. She moved like a machine now, her body running on instinct, her mind sharp and restless. The latest intel pointed to a heavily fortified enemy hideout carved into the side of a canyon 2 days' march from their forward base. It was believed to house not only weapons stockpiles but also high-ranking strategists who were orchestrating attacks against supply lines. Amelia was assigned Overwatch, tasked with providing cover for a ground team infiltrating the area. On paper, it seemed straightforward, but she'd learned that simplicity often hid danger. Her gut told her this mission would be different. As she cleaned her Barrett for the 100th time, checking every screw, every mechanism, she felt the familiar knot of anticipation tighten in her stomach. She thrived on missions like these, even if they took a piece of her each time. They moved out before dawn, the air biting cold, stars fading against the horizon's first light. Amelia rode in the back of a Humvee, her eyes scanning the barren landscape through the narrow window slit. Her spotter, Ramirez, sat beside her, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a tense silence. He'd been with her on enough missions to read the mood without words. The canyon was a treacherous place, full of sharp cliffs and narrow passes perfect for ambushes. She studied the map on her lap, committing every curve and elevation to memory. This wasn't just about shooting from a safe distance, this was about surviving in hostile terrain where every shadow could hide an enemy scope. When they reached the edge of the canyon, the team disembarked and began the slow, grueling climb to their vantage point. Amelia's pack felt heavier than usual, the Barrett digging into her shoulder, but she ignored the ache. Pain was a constant companion out here, as familiar as the smell of gun oil and dust. They reached the overlook after hours of careful movement, the team spreading out to secure the area. Amelia and Ramirez crawled to the edge of the cliff, setting up their nest among the rocks. The canyon stretched out below like a scar across the earth, its sheer walls glowing orange in the setting sun. Through her scope, she scanned the enemy compound, noting guard towers, patrol routes, and entrances. She counted snipers on the rooftops, their positions expertly chosen, and marked them on her map. This wasn't just a fortified base, it was a fortress designed by someone who understood her trade. She felt a flicker of respect for whoever had planned it, quickly smothered by focus. She began adjusting her calculations, measuring distances, wind speed, and angles. Ramirez spotted for her, his voice low and steady, and together they became a single lethal unit, predator and guide. The infiltration team moved like shadows below, relying on her to keep their path clear. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional soft report of her rifle. Each shot was deliberate, precise, a whisper of death that dropped guards before they could sound alarms. She shifted position constantly, never firing twice from the same spot, because she knew other snipers were watching, waiting for a pattern. Her world narrowed to her scope, her breathing, and the rhythmic squeeze of the trigger. Ramirez kept her informed, calling wind shifts and spotting potential threats, his calm voice grounding her. The infiltration team reached the compound undetected, their movements synchronized with her shots. For a brief moment, Amelia felt a flicker of pride at their flawless coordination. It was the kind of operation soldiers dreamed about, silent, efficient, devastating. But perfection never lasted long in war. The explosion shattered the calm, a deafening blast from inside the compound that lit up the canyon walls. The team had been discovered. Gunfire erupted below, tracer rounds slicing through the night sky. Amelia's training kicked in immediately, her hands moving faster than thought as she eliminated targets, clearing paths for the trapped soldiers. Ramirez barked coordinates, his voice louder now but still steady, guiding her through the chaos. The enemy had been waiting for them. Snipers appeared on the opposite cliffs, their muzzle flashes revealing their positions. Amelia switched targets, her scope snapping from one glint of light to another, her shots precise and unrelenting. The Barrett kicked against her shoulder over and over, but she ignored the pain. One by one, enemy sharpshooters fell, but more took their place. The canyon was a killing ground, and they were in the center of it. 2 o'clock, High Ridge, Ramirez called, and she swung her rifle, spotting a sniper almost perfectly camouflaged. She fired, the man crumpled, and she rolled to a new position as a round shattered the rock where she'd just been lying. The enemy had her range. She cursed under her breath, crawling forward, her elbows scraping against jagged stone. She found a new perch and continued firing, her shots carving a path of survival for the men below. Her body trembled with adrenaline, but her mind was eerily calm. This was her element: chaos, precision, death. The team managed to breach the compound, their radios crackling with reports of cleared rooms and secured intel. Amelia covered their retreat, her scope sweeping for threats. The enemy resistance was fierce, but disorganized now that their snipers were down. She and Ramirez worked seamlessly, their communication reduced to single words, numbers, and the occasional grunt of effort as they shifted position. When the last soldier emerged from the compound carrying a satchel of documents, Amelia knew their mission was a success. But success didn't mean safety. The enemy wasn't giving up easily. As they began their retreat, a barrage of gunfire erupted from a hidden position. Amelia spotted the source instantly, a machine gun nest dug into the cliffside. She took the shot, but the Barrett's recoil jolted her sore shoulder, and she missed by inches. She adjusted quickly, firing again. The gunner fell, but not before spraying a burst of bullets that ripped through the rocks around them. Ramirez cursed as a round grazed his arm, blood seeping through his sleeve. "I'm fine," he grunted, brushing it off, but Amelia felt a spike of anger burn in her chest. She fired again, silencing another enemy position, her jaw clenched tight. They moved out quickly, the canyon now echoing with the sound of retreating footsteps and distant gunfire. Amelia stayed at the rear, her scope scanning constantly, her finger always on the trigger. The weight of the Barrett was familiar now, almost comforting, and she carried it like an extension of her own body. When they finally reached the extraction point, she collapsed behind cover, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. The helicopter swooped in, kicking up dust and debris, and she helped Ramirez aboard before climbing in herself. As they lifted off, she looked back at the canyon, now quiet and still, hiding the violence that had unfolded there. Back at base, she didn't celebrate. She didn't join the others in the mess hall or share stories about their near-miss. She went straight to her quarters, stripped off her gear, and began cleaning her rifle, her hands moving with the same meticulous care as always. The smell of gun oil filled the air, and she let the routine calm her racing heart. The mission had been a success, but the cost weighed heavily on her. She thought of the enemy snipers she'd killed, their skill evident in every shot they'd fired. They weren't nameless threats, they were her equals, soldiers who had dedicated their lives to the same deadly craft. She felt no joy in their deaths, only a quiet understanding. This was the life she'd chosen, or maybe the life that had chosen her. She was a ghost now, a shadow that haunted the battlefield, and she knew there was no turning back. The days after the canyon mission passed in a blur of debriefings, equipment checks, and restless nights where Amelia stared at the ceiling, unable to shake the weight of everything she had seen and done. The base bustled with activity, soldiers preparing for future operations, mechanics working on vehicles, and medics tending to the wounded, but Amelia moved through it all like a shadow, detached and silent. She had become accustomed to the rhythm of war, missions, firefights, survival, and the quiet that followed. Yet this quiet felt heavier, pressing down on her chest like a physical weight. Ramirez was healing from his wound, and though he tried to joke about it, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. They were all tired. Even so, command wasn't giving them much time to rest. The intelligence they gathered from the canyon raid pointed to a new threat, a sniper rumored to be even more skilled than those she had faced before. They called him the Phantom, a man who operated so far from detection that entire patrols had been wiped out without a single warning shot. Reports were scarce, but every soldier in their sector knew his name. Amelia didn't need anyone to tell her that eventually, their paths would cross. In fact, she suspected that was the reason she was still being sent into the field. Command wasn't just using her to eliminate threats, they were hoping to bait the Phantom out of hiding. When the orders came, she wasn't surprised. They were deploying her and a small recon unit to a mountainous border region where the Phantom was believed to be operating. The terrain was treacherous, the weather unpredictable, and the enemy held the advantage of familiarity. Amelia packed her gear in silence, her hands steady as she checked and rechecked her rifle, every piece of equipment meticulously maintained. She could feel Ramirez watching her, his arm still in a sling but his eyes sharp. "You know this isn't just another mission, right?" he asked quietly. She nodded without looking up. He didn't have to explain. She understood perfectly. This wasn't about hunting an enemy, this was about survival against someone who thought like she did, moved like she did, and had likely been trained just as rigorously. This was going to be a duel between ghosts. They set out at night, flying low over the rugged mountains in a silent helicopter that dropped them on a rocky ridge miles from their objective. The air was thin and cold, and Amelia's breath came in small clouds as she adjusted her pack and began the long trek through the darkness. The team moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the uneven terrain. Every crunch of gravel sounded deafening in her ears, every gust of wind carried a sense of foreboding. The Phantom wasn't like the others, she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. He was already watching them. That thought didn't make her fearful, it made her sharper, every sense tuned to its highest setting. They reached a vantage point overlooking a narrow valley where several patrols had been ambushed in the past month. Amelia set up her rifle, scanning the area through her scope. The valley was quiet, too quiet, and her instincts screamed that something was wrong. Hours passed in tense silence, the only sound the wind whistling through the rocks. The others rotated shifts, but Amelia refused to take her eye off the scope. She felt him out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting. Her patience was legendary, and she knew this game wasn't about speed, it was about who could wait longer, who could force the other to make a mistake. She slowed her breathing, every movement deliberate, becoming part of the landscape. Then, just as dawn began to creep over the horizon, she saw it, the faintest glint of light on a ridge opposite theirs. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. She shifted her scope, scanning the area, and saw a shape perfectly camouflaged against the rocks, the barrel of a rifle barely visible. The Phantom. Her heart pounded, but she kept her breathing steady. She lined up her crosshairs, adjusting for distance and wind, and slowly exhaled. Just as she began to squeeze the trigger, a round whizzed past her head, striking the rock behind her and showering her with shards of stone. She rolled instinctively, her body reacting faster than thought, and another shot tore through the ground where she'd been lying. He had her zeroed. Amelia crawled to a new position, her body low and silent, her rifle cradled close. Ramirez whispered coordinates, but she already knew where he was. She'd seen him, and he'd seen her. The duel had begun. She moved like water, flowing over the terrain, never staying in one place long enough for him to take a second shot. She caught another glimpse of him through her scope, a flash of movement, a gloved hand adjusting a bipod, and fired. Her bullet struck inches from his position, forcing him to shift. They were evenly matched, trading fire with precision that left no room for error. She felt adrenaline coursing through her veins, her mind calm and focused. This wasn't just a fight for survival, this was a test, a clash of two warriors who had dedicated their lives to this deadly craft. The duel stretched on for what felt like hours, each of them maneuvering for a better angle, using the terrain to their advantage. Amelia moved with a predator's grace, crawling, rolling, firing, and vanishing again. She could feel his intelligence in every shot, every calculated risk he took. He wasn't reckless, he was patient, disciplined, deadly. But so was she. Slowly, she began to anticipate his movements, reading his strategy as if he were speaking to her through every bullet. When she finally saw him again, silhouetted against a patch of sunlight as he repositioned, she didn't hesitate. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and the Barrett roared. The shot hit him cleanly, dropping him where he lay. She stayed motionless, her scope trained on his body for a full minute, waiting for movement. There was none. The Phantom was dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Ramirez let out a shaky breath, muttering, "You got him," but Amelia felt no triumph. She only felt the familiar heaviness that came after a kill like this. She had faced her equal and survived, but at what cost? She crawled down to his position, her rifle at the ready, and studied him. He was young, younger than she expected, his expression calm even in death. She felt a pang of recognition. He could have been her, if she'd been born on the other side of this war. She took his dog tags, not as a trophy but as a reminder, then climbed back to her position, her face unreadable. They exfiltrated at dusk, the helicopter blades thundering in the thin mountain air. As they lifted off, Amelia stared out at the rugged landscape, the sun dipping below the peaks in a blaze of red and gold. She felt the weight of every duel, every mission, every kill pressing down on her. She was no longer just a Clerk who had been underestimated, nor just a sniper. She had become a legend, a ghost whispered about in enemy camps, a name that struck fear into those who dared to challenge her. Yet she felt no pride in it. She had simply done what she was trained to do, again and again, until there was nothing left of the girl she once was. Back at base, she locked herself in her quarters, laid the Barrett on her bunk, and stared at it for a long time. It had been her constant companion, her lifeline, and her burden. She traced the familiar scratches in its metal, thinking of all the lives it had taken. She knew this wasn't the end. There would always be another mission, another sniper, another duel in the dust and wind. She had become part of the war itself, and she didn't know if she'd ever escape it. But she would keep fighting, because it was all she knew, and because somewhere out there, someone else was already watching her through a scope, waiting for their turn. The end.